Dr. Gerald Brooks Leadership Podcast. Partnership with Raul Quaresma Ministries and Cool 97.5, we gladly present to you Dr. Gerald Brooks Leadership Podcast for pastors, leaders, and church workers who are involved in God's ministry every Wednesday from 12 to 12:30 high noon, only here on Cool 97.5.
Welcome to the Gerald Brooks Leadership Podcast, a deep dive into biblical leadership with pastor and author Dr. Gerald Brooks.
Hi, this is Gerald Brooks. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm so excited about the podcast today. I think it's going to be one that will be helpful to leaders and give some perspective and maybe give a little bit of depth to the leadership journey. Let me take a minute. I want to talk to you about laws leaders can't ignore. Laws leaders can't ignore. We know in our society there's a phrase that ignorance of the law is not an excuse. So someone does something and they say, hey, I didn't know that the speed limit was this. I thought it was this. It doesn't stop you from getting a ticket. Your lack of knowledge does not mean that you shouldn't have had knowledge. And so the same thing's true about leadership. There are laws that leaders interact with, whether they intend to, whether they don't intend to, whether they're aware of it or not aware of it. And these laws can really get you in trouble if you ignore them. So there are some laws that you can't. I want to give you a few of these laws. In fact, I want to give you 7 of them. The first one is this, the law of influence. The law of influence. If no one's following you, then you don't have it. Influence is an easy test. You look around, and if no one's paying attention to you, you probably don't have influence. We know that Oswald Sanders said literally decades ago that leadership is influence. Leadership, the essence of it is there's something about you that is spilling over and it begins to impact other people's lives. And sometimes people want to lead, they just haven't created influence. And people will sometimes make a statement like this, well, how do I create influence? I used to give an acronym on influence, and I'm not going to give it today, but the I stood for invest. Invest in others. The quickest way to create influence is to invest in others. Do something for someone else without expecting a return. Just make an investment in them and do that repeatedly with a lot of people. And so do something that is best for someone else. When you do that, you create influence. Then do it for someone else. You create influence. Then do it for someone else. You create influence. And you do that enough, what's going to happen is you're going to turn around and you are going to be a leader because there's going to be a line of people following you. Now, let me tell you what influence isn't. Influence isn't a position where everyone has to follow you. Influence is when people follow you when they don't have to. Position is when people follow you because they're required to. So the law of influence, if no one's following you, then you do not have it. A second law, the law of echo. The law of echo. And the law of echo says this, if no one's repeating it, then they're not hearing it. If no one's repeating it, then they're not hearing it. I believe very much that leadership involves vision casting. And vision is that inherent core quality of a journey that you're taking. And you're inviting other people to take that journey with you. And so it can be a company journey, it can be a personalized journey, it can be a spiritual journey, but you are inviting people to be a part. But before people will follow you, they have to understand where you're going. I like to put it this way. If you went to the DFW airport and you went in Terminal A, There would be flights there that would say, hey, Boston. There would be some that would say over here, San Diego. There would be some that would say Cancun. And the thing about it is, each one of them identify where they're going. Why? They do not want people trying to get on a plane that's not going where they want to go. In fact, before a plane takes off, they will announce this plane is going to, in case someone stumbled onto a plane through some weird accident that they were not supposed to be on. Well, see, the law of echo basically starts with vision. It's something that you are saying, and you're repeating it continually. But if someone else isn't repeating it back, then they haven't heard it. And what I tell leaders is this: you can always tell the level of leadership breakdown. See, usually in an organization, there's level 1. That would be the high executive leaders. And they begin to go to level 2. These would be the VPs of the organization. These would be the individuals that maintain the function of the organization. And then there'd be level 3, and these would be more of the managers. They have not only an overview, but they have hands-on. And then there would be, quote, the workers, the people who specialize in doing the work. But what I tell people is, if level 4 doesn't know why you're doing what you're doing, then level 3 is where leadership broke down. Because if I walk into an organization, I should be able to walk up to every level, and I should be able to hear the vision of that organization. I should be able to hear the vision of that organization. And if I haven't heard the vision of that organization from level 4, then level 3 has failed or level 2 has failed. And what happens is, the reason that's important in vision casting is this: people aren't motivated by what? Well, tell me what to do. Well, that may work for a day, but that doesn't work for a journey. People have to know the why. And vision is the why. And you have to be able to clarify a vision. You have to be able to articulate a vision. You have to be able to give crystalline clarity to that vision, so that what happens is people hear it and they can repeat it. If people aren't repeating it, then they didn't hear it. So the law of echo is this: if you're casting vision and no one's repeating it, the vision hasn't been effectively cast. So what I would do is I would make sure that it is being repeated back. In fact, during the Civil War, General Grant, general for the Union armies, he ended up having an individual that would be a little bit slower in mental processing, that would stand outside his tent. And whenever he would give an order, he would first mention that order to this man. If that man couldn't articulate that order back, then he knew it wasn't crystal clear. It wasn't complex. But what did he want? He wanted to hear an echo. And in your organization, you want to hear an echo. You want to hear it. My organization, here's what I want to hear. We're going to make heaven bigger and the kingdom of God better. That's what we're going to do. We want that to be repeated. We want people to know that the finest moment in our organization is when we say every head bowed and every eye closed. That is a defining moment. So the law of influence: if no one's following you, then you don't have it. The law of echo: if no one's repeating it, then they're not hearing it. And number 3, the law of the wave, W-A-V-E, wave, like at an ocean. The law of the wave is this: you start paddling before it gets to you, or you miss it. You start paddling before it gets to you, or you miss it. See, if you're going to catch a wave, if you're body surfing, if you're surfing, then you start paddling before the wave. Otherwise, the wave is going to pass over you. And what I find is that many leaders haven't learned the law of the wave. And opportunity comes, but because they don't have a sense of timing, they do not get ahead of the wave, because you've got to be paddling. You've got to create momentum. You have to create that first potential burst of energy, and then the wave will take you further. Get it? You create the first burst of energy, and then the wave will take you further. You create that first burst. It's one of the hardest things about leadership is to get people to create the first burst of energy. And so the law of the wave, if you don't start paddling before it gets to you, you'll miss it. So what are the opportunities in your life that they just passed you by? You just, man, I wished I would have seen that at the moment. I wished I would have done something at the moment. Well, that's the law of the wave. You didn't see it, or you saw it and you didn't paddle. And see, you have to create that first burst of energy. It's what Paul said to Timothy, stir up the gift. He says, don't wait for the gift, stir the gift. Don't wait till you feel it. Create the feeling. And that's what he's saying. He's saying that that energy will be there. And so the law of influence, if no one's following you, then you don't have it. The law of echo, if no one's repeating it, then they're not hearing it. The law of the wave, if you don't start paddling, you'll miss it. Number 4. The law of relationships. Invest in them or they will not be there when you need it. Now, this is a little bit of law number 1. It's influence. But it's a little bit different because in everyone's realm of leadership, there are people they need around them. And you've got to determine. Like, I didn't know it when I first started in my leadership journey that I needed a banker around me. I didn't know it when I started in my leadership journey that I needed an attorney around me. I didn't know that I needed basically someone who was going to be a confidant around me, and that I needed somebody who was going to be a partner with me. And see, each one of those are a little bit different roles, but you can go buy them. You can go find a banker that will let you bank with them. You for sure can find an attorney that will let you pay them. But I needed more than that. I needed a relationship. I needed to do what I did last night, pick up the phone at 11 o'clock at night and know that the person that I've built a relationship with, who is an attorney, would answer the phone, because I needed to get something done that was going to need to be done quickly. So, the law of relationship, you invest in them. You have to have relational equity. And this means you're always investing. And if you haven't read it, I would encourage you. It's a very extensive book and probably too big for a lot of people, but it's called Team of Rivals by Doris Kearns. She's just remarkable in her knowledge of Lincoln. And as you begin to look in this book, one of the things he did was he created relational equity. He wrote notes and he literally put his arms around people. He praised people that were not praising him. He encouraged people that were not encouraging him. He thanked people who were never thankful to him. But all of this created relational equity, and a team of people that were averse to him became very supportive of him because he created relational equity. Who are the people you need around, and how are you investing in them? How are you creating relational equity in them? So the law of relationships, invest in them or they won't be there when you need it. See, if you need to be able to hone in on legal advice, you're going to have to create that relationship before you're in legal trouble. Same thing with medical advice. You're going to have to. And so you don't wait to invest. You invest first. And so the law of relationships, invest in them or they won't be there when you need them. The relationships won't be there. The law of significance, don't settle for success. Boy, I really hone in on this in our School of Leadership because I believe one of the greatest failures in America today is that people thought success would satisfy. And the only people who think success would satisfy are people who've never had success. Because people who are successful, they know it doesn't satisfy. They know there's only so many square feet in a home, and you can keep adding, but it doesn't satisfy. There's only so many cars you can have, but having another car won't satisfy you. There's so much education you can get, but having another degree will not satisfy you. All of those kind of things are critical. But see, the law of significance is this. There's something beyond success. Success just positions you to have greater significance. Now, does that mean you can't be significant without high levels of success? No. It just means the highly successful have an opportunity to be truly significant and a wider range. Why? Because success draws attention. It's a bug light. All the bugs are watching you. And so the law of significance is you don't settle for success. Any success I have is so that I can do something that is going to be more impactful. And so success is about what? What did you receive? Significance about why. Why are you here? And it's why that satisfies. When you figure out why you're here and you do it, it's satisfying. So I want to encourage you along those lines, the law of significance. Don't settle for success. And then there's the law of life. You were put here for a reason, so find it. Again, some of this is a little bit redundant, but it's the core of what I believe. I believe that there are a lot of people who are leaders who fail in life. But what that means is they probably had talent and skills, but they didn't have a reason. Or they lost sight of their reason. You've got to figure out the reason that you're here. Why did God place you on this planet? What are you here for? Who are you here for? And how are you pursuing that reason in your life? If you haven't come to that, see, I look back on my journey and there were about 40 families that when I started this organization, you know what their reason was? They felt called to help me. That was their reason. Now, those people have grown and some of them have gone on to heaven. But those people will forever be people that I love because they had a calling, and their calling was to me, which allowed me to fulfill my calling to him. And because of that, we know that over 66,000 people in our altars, not around the world, but in our altars, responded to Christ. Well, see, their calling to me positioned us that we could reach that many people. Now, we've reached more than that because we have things that are wider than just our altars, and they'll get credit for that. And we have more than that because, stupid me, I didn't even start counting until 10 years in. So there were probably another 10,000 or plus, but I didn't count the right things. When you're new in life, you just count people. You don't count outcomes. And so I was so focused on people, I forgot that I was here to create an outcome. And so the law of life is you're here for a reason. What is that reason? Has God put you here to be on a team? Has God put you here to lead? Has God put you here? Figure out that reason. And whatever that reason is, pursue it and be all in. Just be all in and pursue it. So let me give you the laws that we've talked about. The law of influence, if no one's following you, then you don't have it. The law of echo, if no one's repeating it, then they're not hearing it. The law of the wave, if you don't start before it gets to you, you'll miss it. The law of relationship, invest in them or they won't be there. The law of significance, don't settle for success, be significant. The law of life, you were put here for a reason, so find it. Number 7, the law of attitude. It always begins with gratitude. See, I've listened to people teach on attitude forever. But then one day it hit me. I've never met anyone with a great attitude who wasn't someone with gratitude. So if you want to know the shortcut to being a person with a great attitude, do you have gratitude? Do you find moments to be thankful to God, to be thankful to those around you, to be thankful? You know, in Romans chapter 1 and verse 21, it says, that they knew God, and they glorified him not. Neither were they thankful, therefore their spirits became darkened. Do you realize what that says? When we lose our sense of gratitude, there's a level of darkness that begins to penetrate our hearts and our lives. And that's true in every aspect. They say the number one defining thing that will determine, if you had to look at one thing in a marriage that will determine its success or failure, that is how frequently the two people will say thank you to each other. The law of attitude always begins with gratitude. It's not being positive, it's being thankful. See, if you're thankful, you're going to be positive. Some people, well, I want a positive attitude, then have gratitude. Because gratitude will always make you positive. You will look for the positive. You will look for the opportunity to say thanks. So the law of attitude always begins with gratitude. Now, again, these are laws that leaders cannot ignore. The law of influence, if you ignore it, you're going to look around and you can have all the titles you want, but no one's there. The law of echo, you can talk all you want, but if no one's repeating it, they're not hearing it. The law of the wave, opportunities will keep passing you by. The law of relationships, if you don't invest in them, you will not have them. The law of significance, you don't settle for success. And the law of life, you're put here for a reason, so find it, discover it, pursue it. And the law of attitude, be thankful. Develop gratitude. Now, I've said all this to you for these simple reasons. You can't ignore these. These are laws you can't ignore. If you ignore a law, it always comes with a penalty. What I want to say to you is, don't be penalized by ignoring these laws. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to the Gerald Brooks Leadership Podcast. If you'd like more information on Dr. Brooks's books, audio, or speaking engagements, please go to geraldbrooksministries.com. Welcome to the Gerald Brooks Leadership Podcast, a deep dive into biblical leadership with pastor and author, Dr. Gerald Brooks.
Hi, this is Gerald Brooks. Thank you so much for joining me today for my podcast. Today, I want to take a few minutes and I want to talk to you about leaders need a model. Leaders need a model. The reality is that most people are visual learners. They learn from seeing, they learn from watching. I have this new puppy and I'm a dog person and I've always had puppies in my life and dogs because they just bring me a sense of fulfillment and joy. But this puppy right now just watches. She watches everything the older dog does. She watches everything that I do. And they just watch. Why? It's how they learn. It's how they learn to be who they're supposed to be. Well, what I've learned is that leaders need a model. The problem with that is there are more bad models than good models. And we see that in the book of Exodus. And it's the story of Moses. And Moses is sort of in a dichotomy. He's between two worlds. He's been raised in Pharaoh's house, but at the same time, he is dealing with the fact that he has this passion for his culture being Jewish. And so there's this pull that goes on. And so one day Moses, as he gets older, wants to help the Jewish people. And he goes out and he sees an Egyptian abusing a Jewish individual. So he gets off and he kills that individual. He thinks no one saw him, but he's going to find out that when you're in leadership, people are always watching. There's never a time that you're not being watched. People see what you do. But here's the thing. My question is, here Moses is feeling this call of God to help Israel. It's exactly what he was put here on the planet to do. And yet, in his first leadership moment, what does he do? He kills someone. Why did he do that? Because that's the model he had grown up under. See, if someone didn't obey Pharaoh, they didn't negotiate with them, they didn't have conflict resolution, they were killed. And see, that's what happens to leaders. They revert back to what they're used to seeing. And the struggle in our society is there's more bad leaders than good leaders. There's more leaders out there that are doing bad things than doing good things. And so what happens is, as well-intentioned, like Moses, people are, when they get under stress in leadership, they tend to fall back to their bad models. This is why Paul was very specific to young Timothy. And when he was talking to him about his leadership journey, he said to Timothy, he said, "Be thou an example." Before he told him anything else, he said, "Timothy, you're an example." He said, "Timothy, you need to write it down. You're a model." And what was he saying? He was saying to Timothy, you lead with your life before you lead with your words. People watch you before they listen to you. And a lot of people always want to be heard, but they never want to be watched. But Paul was putting it in perspective. Before they listen to you, they watch you. And he said, "Timothy, you need to understand, you're going to be the first model of Christians that people have ever seen. And what you do is what they're going to replicate." Now, Paul knew this because he was bold enough to say something. He said it in 1 Corinthians. He said, "Follow me as I follow Christ." What was he saying? He said, "I'm going to be an example to you. I'm going to be a model to you." And what I want you to realize is people need good models. And so if you're going to lead, you're going to need a model. Well, I want to look at 7 examples of Jesus being a model of leadership. 7 examples. And I want you to see what Jesus did during sort of these moments of his life that create the model of leadership for us. The first one's in Matthew 26, verses 62 and 63. Jesus is heading towards the cross, and he's been brought before the high priest. And the high priest is making accusation after accusation, and Jesus doesn't answer a word. He doesn't say anything. Why did he not say anything? Because he knew that as a leader, there are times when you cannot say everything you're feeling or thinking. See, Jesus was God, but he was God come in the flesh. And I know, and you know, our flesh has a lot to say. And as Jesus is being accused, ridiculed, and abused, you know that his flesh wanted to speak up. But he didn't say a word. See, silence is a part of the model of leadership. Few words are your best words. Did you get that? Few words are your best words. That's what the writer of Proverbs said when he said, "In a multitude of words, you want not for sin." He said, the more words, probably the more trouble you're creating. And so Jesus, when he was in this stressful moment where he's being accused and people are coming at him, what did he do? He chose silence. He didn't answer. He didn't say anything. He didn't try to verbally joust. He didn't get into some kind of verbal debate. He understood that few words are your best words. I've learned as a leader the hard way. The fewer my words, the better my life. Words always come at a cost. They're always expensive. And when you say things you shouldn't say, it's hard to get yourself out of circumstances. And so Jesus models that few words are your best words. Well, there's another example, and that's in John chapter 18 and verses 10 and 11. At this moment, this is before the previous event, Jesus is having the soldiers come after him to arrest him as he's being led to the cross. And when that happens, Peter instinctively reacts. And what he does is he pulls out a sword and he begins to sling that sword and he cuts off one of the soldiers' ears. And what Jesus did was Jesus healed the man. See, Jesus was setting a new standard. And what he said, he that lives by the sword will die by the sword. And what he was saying is simply this: refusing to live by the standard that everyone else lived by. He was setting new standards of leadership. See, too often in our society, here's the basis of justification. Well, everyone else is doing it. Well, so-and-so did this. Well, if they did this, then I should do this. And what Jesus was saying through his model was this. He says, guys, you've got to understand, there are standards out there that you don't want to replicate. In fact, you not only do not want to replicate them, you want to change them. And you want to live by a different standard and a higher standard. And so Jesus reached forth and he touched the man's ear, and he was instantly healed. And see, what God wants us to understand is, if you are going to experience new standards, then you're going to have to listen to things that only God is saying. I can tell you that that man, when his ear was healed, he probably heard things he's never heard before. Because God was showing the reason people live by old standards is because they're not listening to God and the new standards. And so I want to encourage you that there are times as a leader, you've got to model a new standard. You have to be in a position that you do something different than everyone else does. You don't say what everyone else says. You don't do what everyone else does. You turn around and you just react differently. And then in John chapter 8 and verses 10 through 11, there's this vivid story of a lady being dragged before Jesus. We all know the story. It's horrific. She has been caught in the act of adultery. And we know the uneven playing field because the man wasn't there, but the lady was there. But here's this moment where this lady has been caught in the act and is supposed to be judged. But Jesus begins to listen to the cries, and we know he began to kneel down and he began to write in the sand. And as he began to write in the sand, slowly people began to leave. Nobody knows what he wrote. There's always been this subjective idea that he was writing the sins of the people who had brought the lady to him. We don't know that for sure, but there was something about the moment that was intimidating to the people who brought the lady. And as this intimidating moment is unfolding, all of a sudden Jesus looks up and he looks at the lady and says, "Where are your accusers?" And she says, "I have none." And he said, "Neither do I accuse you. Go thy way and sin no more." And what Jesus was doing was he was modeling something that I think is so profound. He was refusing to keep score. He was refusing to keep score. See, he knew that the scoreboard will lie to you. The scoreboard will tell you that you're winning when you're really losing, and it will tell you that you're losing when you're really winning. I've watched people who are profound givers, and as profound givers, when they give, what happens is it looks like they've lost. But on the other hand, you give enough time, and you'll find out that that giver has received so much from God that the result is that their life is different. But if you just kept score on the immediate moment, it would say big L, loser. But this life scoreboard doesn't tell you the truth. And you need to know that. And you need to know that when everyone else is watching the scoreboard, that scoreboard is telling facts that just are not true. And so Jesus refused to keep score. He refused to keep score on other people. Man, can you imagine how liberating that is? Not having to remember the score on other people, let alone remembering the score on yourself. Jesus was leading by a different model. And that is, he was saying, I'm not going to keep score the way this world keeps score. I'm not going to turn around and value what this world values. This world values ridicule and put down, but I value something differently. So the model that Jesus created was, you don't get to keep score. You don't get to keep score on other people. Because if you keep score on other people, then other people are going to keep the score on you. Another story is a vivid one in Matthew chapter 14 and verse 31. It's Jesus as he's walking on the water. And as he walks on the water, Peter sees him, and when he recognizes it's Jesus, he says, I want to walk on the water too. Now, I got to be honest with you. Even if I saw Jesus walking on the water, I think I'd have been like the other 11. Hey, go for it, Peter. You get out there. You get out there and you walk on the water. I still like the security of that boat. But got to hand it to Peter. He jumps out and he begins to walk. But it says, hearing and seeing the wind and the waves, he began to sink. This is always intriguing to me that it says he began to sink. When you jump in a pool, do you begin to sink or do you just sink? There's no beginning to it. You're under the water. But see, this was different because as we all know, Jesus was walking on the water. But Peter was walking on the words of Jesus. And the more he lost sight of what Jesus was saying, the more he would begin to sink. Now, here's what we learn. It would have been easy for Jesus to just look at Peter and said, okay, you got yourself into it. Get yourself out of it. Swim back to the boat. But what Jesus did was he reached down with his hand and he picked him up. And they walked to the boat together. Now, here's the model. Can you help people when they fail? See, Peter had failed. He got his eyes on the wind, as though you can walk on the water when it's a non-windy day. He got his eyes on the waves, as though you can walk on the water when there aren't waves. And all of a sudden, he begins to sink. But as he begins to sink, Jesus reaches out, grabs him, and they walk back. See, many times we're willing to help the successful succeed more. We're not willing to help the person who's failed learn how to succeed. Jesus was creating the model, and the model was basically this: help people who fail. So I want you to look at some of these models. Your best words are when you say few words. There are new standards. Don't live according to the standards of others. And don't look at the scoreboard because it's going to lie to you. And help people who fail, not just those who succeed. And then in 1 Corinthians chapter 15 and verse 5, it's a story of Jesus after he is resurrected. And we know that in the pathway to the crucifixion, Peter was all big and bad. And he had said, I'll never betray you. But he did betray him, and he betrayed him 3 times. And even though Jesus had risen from the dead, Peter felt disqualified. And isn't it true that all of us at times, we feel disqualified? No matter how merciful our God is and how caring our God is, we feel disqualified. But here's what goes on. Jesus appears to him, even though he denied him. And he's modeling something else. Never give up on people who've disappointed you. Never give up on people who've disappointed you. Just don't give up on them. Don't give up on people who've disappointed you. I love that. Jesus' model is just so amazing. Few words are your best words. Live by setting new standards. The scoreboard lies to you, so don't watch it. Help people who fail and never give up on people who've disappointed you. Well, in Matthew chapter 14, verses 13 and 14, it talks about Jesus when he heard some bad news. And hearing bad news is hard on any leader. And this was hard on Jesus because he just heard that John the Baptist had died. Now, the reason this is important is on the planet Earth, there was only one person who had even a glimpse of who Jesus was. and what Jesus had come to do. And that was John the Baptist. And so when he gets the news that John the Baptist had died, it says he left to be alone. We all know what that feels like. You get some bad news, you want to process it, you want to get away so you can just sort of regulate your thoughts and maybe spend some time with God trying to sort through the emotions. But it says that the multitude followed him. It says people began to follow him. See, Jesus was having a bad moment. And yet in the midst of it, people followed him. And it says he turned and he healed their sick. And Jesus created a model, and that model's really profound. Can you help others even when you're hurting? Can you help others even when you're hurting? I could go through story after story of times when Jenny and I were going through issues in our own family that were so painful, yet we were required by the nature of the calling on our life to help people. And what I want to say to you is that you don't get to call time out when other people's needs are on the line. It's not always easy, but Jesus, during this tender moment in his life, when people were there, he reached out and he ministered to them, helping others even when you're hurting yourself. And then in John 13 and verse 5, this is Jesus again preparing for the event of the crucifixion. And he's taken up the towel being the position of a servant, and he's begun to wash the feet of somebody. But he washed the feet of all his disciples, but one of those disciples was a man named Judas who was going to betray him. See, Jesus knew Judas was going to betray him, and yet he washed his feet. See, Jesus' model, never allow someone else's actions to determine yours. Never allow someone else's actions to determine yours. These are 7 models that Jesus set. Few words are your best words. Setting new standards and refusing to live by the standards others have lived by. The scoreboard will always lie to you. It will give you information that's not true. Helping people who fail, not just those who succeed. Never giving up on people who disappoint you. And helping others even when you're hurting yourself. And then never letting someone else's actions determine your actions. I think these composites model leadership for us. And I think they're pretty profound. And I think maybe if you spend some time just thinking them through, you might find that maybe in your life, one of these models is a model that you need to follow. Maybe you're good at 4 of them or 5 of them. Maybe there's a couple of them you need to spend some time with, and you really need to navigate and say, hey, I need to embrace that as my model. Well, I want to encourage you to do that. I want to encourage you to wrap your arms around the model of Jesus. Because if you don't follow his model, you're going to follow someone else's model. Because leaders follow the model of what they've seen. So let's look at Jesus' model and let's follow it. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to the Gerald Brooks Leadership Podcast. If you'd like more information on Dr. Brooks's books, audio, or speaking engagements, please go to geraldbrooksministries.com.
Thank you for listening on today's broadcast. Join us again and may God bless you. For more information, you may contact us on the following social media account and website. Just tap Raul Quaresma Ministries and Dr. Gerald Brooks Ministries. Subscribe, follow, like, and share us on Facebook, YouTube, Twitch TV, and Instagram.